Hello and good day to our Pinoy Pork Challengers. I am Rachel Jella Castillo, Marketing Supervisor of Premium Feeds Corporation, makers of world-class feed for hogs and poultry. In behalf of Premium Feeds, I am very happy to introduce to you our guest speaker for today, who will talk about nutrition and feeding of the modern genotype females for optimum performance and maximum profitability. He is an agriculture graduate from the University of the Philippines, Los Baños in 2011, Master of Science in Animal Science, Swine Nutrition in 2018 in South Dakota State University. He worked for feed and feed additive companies as nutritionist for 5 years. Joined PIC Philippines Incorporated on July 2018 as nutrition specialist. Provides nutrition assistance for PIC joint ventures in Vietnam and Japan. Friends in the industry, please welcome Mr. Ron Aldwin Navales.
So, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I am Ron Aldwin Navales, and today my topic will be on the feeding of the modern genetics. So, specifically, we are to tackle the nutrition and feeding of the modern genotype female for optimum performance and maximum profitability. So I would like to start this presentation with a take-home message. So I want us to remember these messages at the end of my presentation. So first, good gilts tend to be consistently good sow. It is important to feed the gilts for adequate growth, reproductive tract development, and adequate bone development. So simply because these gilt, they will stay in the farm for a longer period. So therefore, what we want is to maximize their performance and to maximize their value. So second, the genetic selection has changed the way we are feeding the sows during gestation. So the lean genetics that we have now are more efficient. So therefore, the way we should be feeding this animal or this female should be different. So we should consider both the body condition of the female and their growth rate. So third, during lactation, it's important to maximize the colostrum and the milk production. And on the side of the female, we want to maximize their feed intake and minimize the body condition loss. So otherwise, it will affect their succeeding parity performance. And then finally, the goal of feeding during wean to service interval is to maximize the performance in the subsequent production. So let's start with the feeding of the developing gilts. So our target or our notion is that the good gilts, as mentioned earlier, they tend to be consistently good sow. A big part of the sow lifetime productivity is played in parity 1 or first gestation. So this implies that other factors held constant if the performance of a gilt is good, no? So their performance in the succeeding parity will tend to be good as well. Of course, as I mentioned, other factors held constant. Our goal is to have an adequate growth, adequate reproductive tract development, adequate bone development, and sound food and leg structure. Because our ultimate objective is to maximize the retention rate of this animal. So be aware that considering the economics, if we purchase the gilt it is very unlikely that we will gain the return on investment for that gilt during the first parity. So oftentimes, the break-even is during the second or third parity. And then we maximize its value during the fifth and the sixth parity. So which is why we want to extend that retention rate. So what I'm showing here is adapted from the study of Patterson and others in 2020. From the University of Alberta, looking at the components of gilt eligibility. So there are 4 pillars of gilt eligibility. So first is the age at first breeding. So what we want is to breed between 200 to 225 days. So second is the younger or age at puberty. So what we want is younger than 195 days. So that is congruent with that age of puberty, which is 200 to 225 days, and the concept of second estrus. So what we want is to breed them on the second estrus cycle. So the third cycle is forgivable, considering if the gilts are lighter. The last one would be the weight at first breeding. Our target would be between 135 to 160 kilogram of body weight. So now, the common question that you will receive is that which among these four pillars or component is considered to be most important. So if you ask a reproductive physiologist, their answer would be the four pillars are equally important. No, so the absence of one or two or three pillars or of this guild eligibility will penalize the performance or the productivity of our females. But for the purpose of this presentation, I would like to focus on the weight at first breeding. So simply because of the impact of the nutrition management with regards to the weight at first breeding. So what you are seeing in the graph in your right is the trend in the genetic potential of our modern genotype females. So we concluded that there is a greater growth potential for gilts or for today's gilt. So if you look at this graph here, so running from left to right, that is the time, no, from the genetic farm and in the field. Notice that there is a positive linear trend in the estimated body weight at day 210. So in the past, in 2012, the average weight of our gilts is around 144 kilogram. So now, in 2021, the gilts that we are breeding now at day 210, they are weighing at 155 kilogram body weight. So now, people might argue, okay lang yun, Ron, kasi the 155 is still within the target, no? It's still within the 135 to 160 kilograms. So okay pa ako with the 155 kilogram. However, we need to look at the distribution or the population of this female. So what I want you is to focus on the graph on the top, no? So this is a normal distribution of two groups of animal. So the red distribution curve is representing the average weight of 144 kilogram, no? So 11% of those animal, of those herd, are weighing more than 160 kilogram. So now, if we shift this normal distribution curve from left to right, as represented by the blue distribution curve, no? So you will see that they are now doubled. So those animal weighing more than 160 kilogram, which is above our target, has doubled. So it is now representing 36.6% of the population. So yes, the mean population or the mean weight of the population is 155, pero a bigger proportion of your females coming into first breeding at that 210 days, no, they are more than 160 kilogram. So further, we look at the long-term impact of the heavier gills at breeding. So here is the trend in the weight for two groups of animals. So the one represented by the red bar, our graph at the bottom. So those that are represented by the red bars, so those are the gills that are weighing 144 kilogram. And then the blue one, those are the gills that are weighing 155 kilogram body weight at first breeding. So it is evident that the heavier gills become heavier sows in the subsequent parity. Parity 1, parity 2, parity 3, parity 4, and then parity 5. And it is not a good thing, no? Because oftentimes, the heavier sows, they will have a higher maintenance requirement, and oftentimes, they are the problematic sows. Okay. So the question is, Ron, you are discussing about nutrition. So why you are talking about the genetic potential of these animals? Because we need to understand that genetic potential of the modern genotype females in terms of the feeding management. So knowing the target 135 to 160 and considering the current genetic potential of our modern genotype females, we need to align the way we are feeding our animal. So shown here in this table is a typical phase feeding program. One common question would be how many phases should we feed our modern genotype female? So this is an example of 3-phase feeding post nursery. So from 23 to 60 kilogram to 60 to 90 and then 90 kilogram to breeding. So from 23 to 60 kilogram, we can use a GDU specific diet, or we can either a commercial guilt diet. So ibig sabihin, those diet that are intended for our commercial hogs, for those that are intended for slaughter, we can feed that until 60 kilogram. So now the change will be coming from the pigs weighing 60, or for the females weighing 60 to 90 kilogram, because at this point we should be strict in feeding them a GDU specific diet. So oftentimes our producers are feeding grower diet during this time, no? So when they receive the delivered gilts, oftentimes they will be feeding them with a grower diet. But what we are recommending is to feed a gilt developer diet. So why? So simply because at this time point, they have a higher requirement for vitamin and trace mineral, which is necessary for reproduction, right? Because unlike the slaughter pigs, after 150 days, bebenta na natin. But this one, we will maintain this animal for reproduction. Another thing is they have a higher calcium and phosphorus requirement. So similar to that concept, no, they will stay in the herd for a longer period of time. Therefore, they will have a higher requirement for calcium and phosphorus for bone mineralization. And then from 90 kilogram to breeding, we can use a GDU specific diet, or we can use a gestation diet. So what is more practical to do is to feed them gestation diet. So the reason for doing that is because we want to modulate the growth of the female. So in summary, we provide ad libitum access to feeds from birth to first breeding, no? Especially during the last 3 weeks prior to breeding. We want to feed them ad libitum, no? And I'll be honest in this point, no. So because currently we are evaluating the concept of the ad libitum feeding, we are looking into the concept of feed restriction and what is its impact on the reproductive performance of the animal. But our current knowledge now is to feed them ad libitum. Then we have the lysine to energy ratio. So we use 97% of the commercial gilt concentration. So assuming our requirement for the slaughter pig is 1% SID lysine, ibig sabihin for the gilt developer, what we want is 0.97, 3% lower, no? So again, the reason for that is we want to modulate the growth of the animal. Calcium and phosphorus and vitamin and trace minerals, they are higher in terms of the requirement than the commercial gilts. And then finally, we want to measure the gilt weight to ensure that we are meeting the target. No? So moving forward, we have the feeding management for the gestating herd, the gestating gilts and sows. The nutrient recommendation is anchored in the genetic improvement. We need to understand that this is the modern genetics now. So the old practice that we have in the way we are feeding the gestating gilts, no, should be different. So kasi iba na nga yung modern genotype natin. Our goal is to meet the nutrient requirement for maintenance and growth, to maximize the embryo survival, and to have the adequate development of the conceptus or the product of conception, and to manage the body condition of the female. So during early gestation, what I did here is I pulled some of the trials that we have, 3 of those trials. So the trial that you are seeing on top is adopted from Malman and others in 2020, looking at the piglet throughput. So as impacted by the different feeding levels. So the red bars here represents the 108% of the maintenance requirement. The blue bar here represents the 150% of the requirement, and the gray bar represents 192% of the requirement. So it is glaring, no? It is glaring that if we go beyond the 192% of the requirement for maintenance, so the piglet, excuse me, the piglet throughput is smaller or mas mababa siya, no? So this gives us an indicator that we cannot feed above the 10 megacalories of energy per day, metabolizable energy, or we cannot feed 192% of their maintenance requirement. So the 2 trials on the other hand, so below is an evaluation of the requirement for maintenance ranging from 85 to 150 for the terminal sows, and then we have the 100 to 175 for the maternal sows. So looking at the piglet throughput. So as evident in here, there's no significant impact on the total born index up to the 150 to 175. So essentially, it supports the earlier trial, the one on top, that we cannot be more than 190 plus, but 150, 175% of the maintenance requirement should be okay. No? Then feeding during late gestation. So it is a common industry practice that during late gestation, what the farmer or what the producer is doing is that they are increasing the feed allocation. So that is commonly known as the bump feeding. So at the end of, for example, 90 days of gestation, the feeding is 2 kilos from breeding until 90. And then from 90 until they are transferred to farrowing room, tinataas ng producer yung feed allocation. Let's say 2.5, 2.7, or some 3 kilos. So the rationale for doing that is because during the late gestation, the growth of the conceptus or the product gestation is exponential. And therefore, somehow it is logical. Mataas yung growth ng fetuses eh. Therefore, I need to increase the feed allocation. However, in this descriptive summary of bump feeding that we conducted, it was evident that it has minimal impact on the piglet birth weight. So it's ironic, no? So we are doing that to increase the weight of the piglet, but apparently it has minimal impact on the piglet birth weight. So what happened to the extra feeds that are given to the female? Napunta doon sa maternal body. And we don't want that. We don't want that because it will impact the body condition of the animal. It will tend to make our herd fatter. It will impact the stillborn rate. It will impact the lactation feed intake. So the same study were conducted, or analysis was conducted for the sow. We observed the same observation such that it has a minimal impact on the piglet birth weight. And what happened to the extra feeds? It went to the maternal gain. Again, we don't want that as it will negatively impact the stillborn rate, the retention rate, and the lactation feed intake. So besides the body condition, we are also looking at the body weight of the animal. So again, we discussed earlier about the growth potential of the gilts during gilt development. Of course, magkasunod yun, ano? So now, it is a common practice for some industry practitioner na, matimbang yung inahin ko during after breeding. So their tendency is to lower the feed allocation. But by doing that, we are sacrificing the feeding of the animal. So as evident in this study or in this comparison, so this is a group of animal. I have the different box plots here. They are being fed with 5.2 megacalories of ME per day. So now, from 0 to 30, as represented by the blue box plot and the gray box plot representing day 30 to 63, that is above the maintenance requirement. The maintenance requirement is the red line. So they are being fed above the maintenance requirement. Good. However, because they are gaining weight, remember these are gilt, they are still growing. From day 60 to 90, 90 to 112, you are feeding them below the maintenance requirement. So kumbaga, it is contrary with your objective. So you want to feed them below the requirement kasi you are perceiving them to be heavier. No? However, if you do that, mas nagkakaroon tayo ng concern kasi you are feeding them below maintenance. So because of that, we are feeding them at 5.9 megacalories of ME per day. So with that, we will be feeding them above their maintenance requirement. So this justifies the feeding recommendations that we are giving. No? So for the gilts, regardless of the perceived body condition and the weight of the animal, we give them a constant feed allocation of 5.9 megacalories of ME per day. So we did the same for the gestating sows, looking at the feed allocation, no, to make sure that we are not feeding them below the maintenance requirement. So this gives us this recommendation, for the gilts. So for the teen animal, represented by the red text there, we give them 8 megacalories of ME per day at any stage of the gestation. So however, we need to be cautious, no? Kasi by feeding that 8 megacalories of ME per day for 30 days, we expect them to gain weight. Ibig sabihin, magiging siya ng body condition. So now, if they are already ideal after that 30-day assessment, of feeding 8 megacalories of ME per day, then we need to lower their feed allocation to the necessary amount. However, if they are still thin for whatever reason, then we continue feeding that 8 megacalories of ME per day. For the ideal herd or ideal sows, similar to the gilt, we feed them 5.9 megacalories of ME per day. But that is for the second gestation. For the third gestation and above, so we make some adjustment. So what we want is to give them an extra 0.75 megacalories of ME per day, additional of 1/4 kilo of feeds per day. So the reason for doing that is to make sure that we are not feeding them below the maintenance requirement. For the fat sows represented by the yellow text, we feed them essentially the same as the way we are feeding the ideal animal. 0 to 30, 90 to 112 days of gestation, early gestation or late gestation, we feed them 5.9 megacalories of ME per day. So when do we do the necessary adjustment? Kasi mataba siya, dapat ibaba ko yung feed allocation. Gagawin lang natin yon during the mid-gestation, that is from day 30 to 90 of gestation. So to make sure that we are not feeding them below the recommended base feed allocation during the early and the mid-gestation. So in summary, never feed the gilts below the feeding level of 5.9 megacalories of ME per day, regardless of their body condition. We feed the sows based on the level during the first day after breeding might lead to the reduced embryo survival if we underfed them. It is a double-edged sword kasi if we feed them excessive naman, beyond the 10 megacalorie, as evident by the trial, it has a negative impact on the total bone. Do not feed fat sow below recommended phase feeding level during early and late gestation. We do the adjustment kailan? During the mid-gestation. For the P2 animal, during late gestation, consider increasing the base feeding level up to 0.75 megacalories of ME per day. For the lactating animal, so the goal is to maximize the colostrum and milk production, to maximize the feed intake, and to minimize the body condition weight loss or body condition loss. So these are the two trials where we generated the requirement for SID lysine. So our recommendation for the SID lysine for the gilts is around 5.9 grams per day. And then for the sows, we have 56.5 grams per day. So that would be equivalent to 57 grams per day for if we are talking about the herd. And then another thing is the feeding regimen. So oftentimes we are doing the step-up feeding for the lactating animal, but this is a study conducted or adopted from the United Animal Health, looking at the comparing the 8 step-up, 5 step-up, and the full feeding. And it is evident here that the full feeding gives us a higher piglet daily gain in comparison with the step-up feeding. So during, for the lactating animal, what we want is to provide ad libitum access to feeds. So oftentimes people will ask us, hindi naman niya mauubos yung 5 kilo during the first 7 days. Bakit ko kailangan itaas? Yes, that is true. So what we want is to not limit the feed intake of the animal. As long as the animal is wanting to eat, we give that to them. It is not the duty of the production people to limit it, unlike the step-up program. Ensure adequate water access because of the impact or the relationship between the intake of water and the dry matter intake. Manage the environment to maximize feed intake. Know the lactation feed intake so that we can correct the necessary adjustment in the nutrient content of the diet. For the winter service interval, during the dry period, what we want is to maximize the performance in the subsequent reproduction. So this is a summary of the trials that we conducted comparing the ad libitum feeding and the, in a way, restricted feeding. And it is evident here that there is no value with the ad libitum feeding compared to the restricted, in a way, feeding, assuming that the animal is of good body condition. So what we want is to provide them 8.7 megacalories of ME per day. That should be enough, the 8.7, provided that they are ideal or fat. Now, if they are thin animal, of course, it is logical to feed them ad libitum. So we group the animal for body condition. That is for the ease in terms of the production setup, so we can easily feed the animal. And of course, we ensure that the feed is fresh and we minimize the wastage. So at the end of this, I want to show you the dynamic feeding program for the maternal female. So this is a web application tool that we have, no, to help our producer, to help our nutritionist in developing the feeding program of the animal. So we just provide it with some input about the diet, how much is your energy level, how much is your SID, lysine level, and the program will tell you that, okay, given that production or given that feeding level or given that feeds, no, this is the amount of feeds na ibibigay natin for the animal. It will be also helpful for the nutritionist simply because it will provide some specification, and finally, in terms of the economics, it will tell us what could be the potential improvement in terms of economics and performance. This is done in collaboration with University, North Carolina State, the Universidade Federal do Rio Grande do Sul, South Dakota State University, and Kansas State University. So as a final take-home message, as mentioned, good gilts, they tend to be consistently good sows. It is important to feed the gilts for adequate growth, reproductive tract development, and adequate bone development. Genetic selection has changed the way we are feeding the sows during gestation. The leaner genetics now are more efficient. Therefore, we should consider the body condition and growth rate of the animal. During lactation, it is important to minimize the colostrum and milk production to maximize it, to maximize feed intake, and minimize the body condition loss. And then finally, the goal of feeding during winter service interval is to maximize the performance at the subsequent reproduction, because we want to maximize the animal, no, to increase, to have a higher retention rate. So with that, that ends the presentation. I would like to thank Premium Feed Corporation for giving us this opportunity to speak about the way we should feed the modern genotype females. As we try to repopulate now, no, that is a common scenario now, it is also important, it is equally important to know how we should manage our animal, how we should feed our animal, because we have to keep the ball rolling, because we already invested something. So thank you very much.
Tuwing sumisikat ang araw, sumisibol ang bagong pag-asa. Hudyat ng magandang kinabukasan na ngayon ay madali at posible sa tulong ng isa sa mga pinakabagong kaagapay sa industriya ng animal racing, ang Premium Feeds Corporation. Nagsimula sa isang simpleng feed mill at ngayon ay isa sa may pinakabago at modernong feed manufacturing facility. Patuloy na lumalaki at naghahatid ng dekalidad na produkto at serbisyo upang matulungan ang mga nag-aalaga ng hayop sa Pilipinas na maging matagumpay sa kanilang paghahanap buhay. Naniniwala ang Premium Feeds na ang produktong may mataas na kalidad sa abot kayang halaga ang isa sa mga susi sa matagumpay na paghahanap buhay. Samahan pa ng makabagong teknolohiya at ng maaasahang mga empleyado sa likod ng kumpanya. Ito ay para sa mga customers na nagtitiwala sa kakayahan ng Premium Feeds na makapagbigay ng tamang nutrisyon sa mga alagang hayop para sa tagumpay ng animal racers. Dumarami ang tumatangkilik sa Premium Feeds dahil sa mga prinsipyong isinasabuhay nito, ang pagbibigay ng tamang impormasyon sa lahat ng mga pakikipag-usap, ang pagsusumikap at dedikasyon na maiparating sa customer ang magagandang layunin ng kumpanya, at ang responsableng paggawa upang ang bawat customer ay magkaroon ng tiwala sa produkto at serbisyo ng kumpanya. Nariyan din ang maigting na pagbabantay sa kalidad ng pagkain at proseso ng paggawa, kaya tiyak ang commitment ng Premium Feeds. Ang planta ng Premium Feeds ay isa sa pinakamalaking single-site feed plant operations sa Pilipinas. Ito rin ay isang fully automated feed manufacturing facility na sumusunod sa mataas na antas ng kaligtasan at kalidad sa paggawa gaya ng good manufacturing practices at feed safety, quality, and regulatories. Dahil unang iniisip ng Premium Feeds ang kapakanan ng mga customers at end users nito. Layunin lamang ng Premium Feeds na maiparating sa bawat animal raiser ang mga produkto at serbisyo na makatutulong upang mas maging matagumpay ang inyong kabuhayan. Para sa ligtas na pagkain at pagkain, Premium Feeds Corporation. Our quality, your profitability.